All right, I think we're back to the Christy and Deanna show here.
Okay.
All right, so if you are following along in your document, hopefully you are, and you have that handy from last week. We are now on page 21 at the very bottom, and we have made it to the month of May in our Lister calendar. All right, Christy, you want to talk about utility properties?
So when we talk about utility properties, we're talking about the utility lines and poles that run through your town, substations, those kinds of things. We are required to value them. The feature changed a little bit what we do last year in that they're requiring PVR to provide you a value for transmission and distribution. So we will be providing you those values. And then because utility companies are required to file every year a new inventory, is what we call it. They give us new information about what they've added and what they've deleted. Because of that, they get to apply the common level to that number. So we're going to provide you with a value for transmission and distribution. You will enter that into your grand list, applying the CLA to that, your most current CLA that was certified in January. And then you might have other utility properties that you will have to value. You might have hydro facilities, you might have solar. So you probably already have a value on those. You may get a new inventory form. If you're not sure what the value should be, always check with us. It's super important because we also equalize those, which we'll talk about. So you want to really have a conversation with your DA about exactly what each one of those utilities will be at. And because we're changing the format a little, I want to make sure that we're accounting for everything. So we really want to have that conversation with you.
Right. Oh, give me just a moment. Sorry. Christy, did you touch on, my sound went out for a moment, about the land under the utility?
I did not, but I can. So typically the land underneath lines and poles you don't have to worry about because those are right of ways. But also utility companies may own certain parcels of land within your town. They may be under a substation, they may be just independently owned. Those you're going to assess as land parcels within your town. So you may have listings for those as well. And those can go under the miscellaneous category for land.
Okay. So, as a new lister, if you go into your grand list and you see that there is a 2-acre miscellaneous parcel for some miscellaneous raw land, and it is, or you know that there's a substation on top of it, you're not going to change that category to be a UE parcel. We're capturing the generation or that substation separately and valuing the land as a standalone parcel in this instance. And that is mostly because of equalization, which we'll talk about in a bit.
Yep.
But we definitely want to make sure that those are coded separately.
Deanna,
Yeah.
this question goes back to what we were speaking about before, so I thought we should just get this out of the way. The issue of quality and assumed fixtures, is it based on the number of bedrooms? A 4-bedroom house would typically have more bathrooms than a 2-bedroom, regardless of quality.
So in the Microsolve program, which we are all likely more familiar with, the number of bathrooms, number of kitchens, the number of rooms in general does not drive value, and the Marshall and Swift tables are not taking that into consideration. So I think the answer here is no, but I don't know if there's anything you wanted to expound on there, Christy.
The number of fixtures that are presumed increases with the quality, the construction quality of the home.
Right. Regardless of number of rooms.
Yeah,
Yes,
it doesn't have anything to
correct.
do with the amount of bedrooms or bathrooms.
Correct.
That's
All
all.
right. Okay. So, and I had not brought these pop-ups in yet, but again, those electric inventory forms are sent to the towns in early May. I believe that we are now foregoing those physical mailings and actually scanning them and putting them into the VT program. And Terry will show you, or we'll have Pat show you that tomorrow. And then again, review those values with your district advisor. All right. And now, hopefully by May, we're getting ready to lodge our grand list. And before we do so, we want to do some reconciliation processes. Christy?
I'm not exactly sure what we were going to go through here other than to show you where you can get the list for how you can reconcile on the NIMRIC website. And what else were we going to talk about here? Sorry, Deanna.
This screen is just to show which part or which reports are really going to be helpful in their reconciliation
Okay.
process. So the Form
Okay.
411, which we've talked about a few times throughout the last couple of days, gives you that summary of your grand list by category and with a taxable base grand list that we're going to start from. The middle third or bottom 2/3 are going to apply those exemptions that may be statutory, may be special, may be voted, might be veterans, as well as your current use exemptions that have been calculated on a parcel so that we can get to the bottom, which is your actual taxable grand list for education and for municipal. I'm not sure why we highlighted tax book at this point. That's going to be after you've printed your tax bills. But the Form 411, the transfers report in the NEMRIC program, your CAMA program may have something similar so that you can see those transactions back and forth to make sure that as you're reviewing your PTTRs, you can identify what changed. And if something looks strange, you can go and research it to make sure that change was appropriate. I actually never used the transactions report. So, Christy, do you know the difference between the transfers and the transactions report?
I believe the transactions report will show you every single thing that changed and who the user was that changed it.
Who the user was that changed it.
Yep.
That is a great point. We probably should have covered that early on. Your system is permissions based. So if you have 3 listers in your office and you want to know who is changing what, because you might be in there doing different things at different times, having your own individual logins is not a bad idea. We highly encourage it for everything. Otherwise, you might be sitting there scratching your head thinking that you've changed something and you actually were not the one. So how on earth could you possibly explain that to yourself? It's just a really good way to track those and be able to answer those questions for yourselves. The state treasurer's report is something also that comes in at the point of billing, or when those payments start coming in for state payments on tax bills. And then Chris Mealy on his website at nemric.com has a whole webinar and document on comparing the current grand list with other grand lists for different parameters.
We had a lister comment that listers in Rochester don't have access to the tax book.
Okay. Every town does things a little bit differently. There are some towns where the clerk and treasurer don't have access to the grand list program at all. And the listers take care of all of those things. And then there are some towns that have those better, more comfortable relationships where they share those duties. Again, everything in the NEMRIC program is permissions based. If you're interested on how to set up those permissions or different logins with those specific permissions, I think most of the DAs can probably help you out through that, but I'm certainly happy to help too. And there is always Chris at NEMRIC or the folks at NEMRIC that can help you with that as well. Okay, so now we are on to the reconciliation logbook. Christy and I love paper. We love to be able to check things off. Christy likes to do it in color. And then Benton is, our young guy. He likes to do things in a more electronic, less paper fashion. Is that a fair assessment, Benton?
I'll take it.
I'll take it. Okay. Again, we're providing you tools. They may seem archaic, but again, practice makes perfect. And until you really have something under your belt, we really do encourage you to use these tools that we're providing for you. Anything here about the reconciliation logbook, Christy?
Well, I will start by defending myself and saying you can do this in Excel. So it doesn't have to be quite so paper, right? It's just to give you an idea of how will I know where I'm at? How do I keep track of what I've changed? How do I know what my net 411 should look like? What do I know what the value changes I've made are? So having some sort of concept of that as you go along and keeping track of it makes a whole lot of sense. Whether or not you do it after the fact by running reports and reconciling that way, or as you go along to say, okay, I'm changing this, I'm going to make a record of it. Just kind of some thoughts of how you can track what you're doing.
All right. And let's see, that's pretty much it on that one for me too. And then once we have done our reconciliation, which will take longer than what we've just gone through in this document, take your time. This could be a day-long process. It could be a week-long process, depending on your comfortableness with the process and your consistency in dotting your I's and crossing your T's throughout the entire work up to this point. We have a very well-rounded, fully in-depth lodging grand list instructions for listers on our website. It's GB 1067. The GB stands for Guide Bulletin. You'll notice that a lot of our documentation start with those letters. And if you go to our website and just you could type in GB-1067, or you could type in Grand List Lodging Instructions. That query is pretty intuitive to help you find what you're looking for. Anything else here, Christy?
Yeah, I would just add that it is particularly written in the order that you should print things and check them, and it's on purpose. So if you're ready on or about June 4th to lodge your grand list, right? You're ready to let the public know, here it is. You can come look at it. You can come grieve it, etc. That's the lodging date, right? That you're going to get all these reports ready and certify them with the clerk. If you do it all in this order, it will prevent you from having to reprint big, huge documents because you forgot to check other things ahead of time. So really do it in the order that it's intended and the fashion that it's intended.
Christy, I
Yep.
just might add, years ago when I was a new lister, this was something that I relied heavily on, and it is a good resource that I would say anytime you want to lodge, especially as a new lister, this is a great form to use. It's such good material.
Okay, and I
Right.
did put the link in the chat just for folks
did.
to have. Yep.
As I mentioned last week, we are working with Vermont League of Cities and Towns to offer an open meeting law course for listers, so specific to the things that you need to do. And I just want to point out here that anytime you are taking an official action, like lodging and setting your values, it requires that you post a warning and that is a meeting that's available to the public. It's not typical that they come and watch you sign a piece of paper, but it is really important for your town to know that you are doing that. So be very, very careful. There are applications of the open meeting law that if you do not follow the rules, that taxpayers or other people can come in and call the process into question, which will just cause you unfortunate headaches. So all of the work that you do up until the point of lodging your grand list is likely administrative, and you're not actually making that decision until you're lodging the grand list. So if you are confused about that process at all, please look forward to and join us anyway for that open meeting law training if you can. It will be recorded. It will be for your protection. And if you still have questions, reach out to your DA. So now that we've lodged the grand list, we found something we forgot. Christy, do you want to talk about this?
So again, I've said it 18 times, but I'll say it again. Don't panic. You can change things and correct things up until December 31st of the grand list year. The way that you have to think about it is once you've given that final grand list to the clerk, it is now owned by the town and owned in the vault. So you have to think about it like I now have to get permission for changes that I need to make to that after that point. So you have to do what's called errors and omissions. And you can go to the select board and say, listen, I forgot to add this barn. I want to add it under errors and omissions. Here's the parcel number. Can you sign this so I can attach it to the grand list and add it at this point after the fact? And then, of course, you have to follow all the regular processes where the person would have ability to grieve, et cetera, but you can fix the error.
I have a question. We now have paid assessors. Must they follow the open meeting law?
Absolutely. And
Yep.
I would argue that they want to be even more careful about following the open meeting law because they are now a party of one as opposed to a party of three, which is unusual for a lot of Vermont towns moving away from that board of listers. If you have an assessor that is supplementing your board of listers, that assessor actually has no official role in signing off on a grand list. It is still the responsibility of the board of listers, but there is never going to be an exception to open meeting law for lodging your grand list or making an official decision.
And Chris from Nemrick just said there are reconciliation webinars on the Nemrick website as well.
I think that's what we covered in the page where we showed it.
Yes.
Yeah,
We actually gave the link.
Yep, there is a link and the link is available in your document as well. We did test it before we sent it out, so we know that that is functioning and we'll get you right to that webinar. You can imagine if we went through all of that, this would be a 2-week long process from start to finish of everything that we're covering, very cursory throughout this training. We'd love to do it, but we can't.
Last question. What if you don't have a board of listers anymore?
So I think that was to the open meeting law question. So if you do not have a board of listers anymore, statute prescribes that in the event a town removes a board of listers in favor of hiring a professional assessor, then that assessor is responsible and has all of the same permissions as listers do, or responsible for all of those same things. So essentially, you're just rolling the 3 listers into one position, but they still have to follow all of the same laws and responsibilities.
And I think that's it.
All right, let's get back to correcting some errors. So all corrections for errors must be done before December 31st in any given year. Hopefully you find them sooner. Once you get into that month of December and you find errors, every town or by law must give 30 days for a bill to become due. So if you're increasing a value and you change something on December 31st, you're going to make your treasurer a little bit cranky because then they're having to wait for those current receivables into the month of January. So not typical to have them done that late, but they must be done before December 31st. We do provide a form on our website. There are actually 2 errors and omissions forms. The one for an actual error is going to be the PBR 4261E for errors. And that is the one that requires the select board to sign off on any changes. So the process here, you find an error that you need to correct. You no longer have ownership of your grand list once it's lodged after grievance. Anything that happens in your grand list must be by direction of a state filing, whether that's a current use application or change, or a homestead declaration that might change the allocation for homestead and house site. Those are things that the select board should be approving. I'm sorry, that they do not need to approve. If it's just a value change because you forgot to add a garage or a barn came down and you forgot to remove that value, the select board must approve that before you can apply it to your current grand list. And the errors and omission does not equal grievance. Anything else here, Christy?
Nope, I don't think so.
Any questions?
No, I don't see any.
So here we have an example of an error. So taxpayer A comes to you in November stating you have erred in the depreciation of his or her house. This is not a clear error in data and does not qualify for errors and omission. You should advise the taxpayer that they can grieve the following year or add them to your review and inspect list. Any notes here, Christy, about why this is not an errors and omission?
So when you talk about something like depreciation, it's a judgment call and it's also partially an opinion. So anything that happens to be an opinion about value is not something that's a clear errors and omissions. I should be able to exactly look at what you're talking about when we talk about errors and omissions, right? I forgot to put the barn on, or I forgot to take the barn off. I didn't see that there was a whole addition, or I didn't know that your house burned down, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Something that you should have reasonably been aware of on April 1st.
Yep.
Example 2, taxpayer B comes to you in October and says you erred in taking off the barn on their property that fell down in March. This qualifies as an error and you should complete the errors and omissions process. Change the value in your working grand list, get the select board's approval, and then send the taxpayer a change of appraisal notice once you finally have permission to change those. You're going to notify the treasurer to send a revised tax bill and record the changes with that E&O form in the vault at the back of your grand list. Again, hopefully nobody has to do these. They do happen. And at this point, we're not going to be talking about that process probably until August or later. So if this is fuzzy to you or you want a refresher, reach out to your DA.
Deanna,
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Corrections can be grieved, but not errors and omissions.
So the caveat there is that the errors and omission process is not meant to supplant the grievance process. So if it's something that they should have grieved when they got their change of appraisal notice or during that 2-week period that's noticed to the entire town as part of your grand list lodging process, they've lost their opportunity to grieve that piece of information. So for example, that depreciation percentage. That will have to wait until the following year during that grievance process to grieve that value or for the listers to consider it during their reinspect process. Anytime a value changes or the homestead and non-homestead value or house site value shuffle that we'll talk about in a bit, those are noticeable or notice required by statute items. So you have the errors and omission approved, you change the value, and then you send out a change of appraisal notice to notify the taxpayer that they have a change in their value and eventually their tax liability. And they do have the opportunity to grieve on that as well, which is another reason to be very, very sure of the changes that you're making because you don't want to start very litigious processes that late in the year. Anything to add there, Christy?
Yeah, just to be clear, errors and omissions are in fact corrections, so they are grievable.
And let's see, so are we expected to know the barn fell down or are the owner supposed to tell us?
Good point. In this instance, it was presumed that the property owner had told the listers and they forgot to remove it. As part of your annual reinspect process, this seems a little archaic, but there's nothing like driving around into every property in your grand list at least once a year to see what's happening. Sometime around April 1st is ideal. We know that that is not reasonable in a lot of Vermont towns with the way mud season happens sometimes 3 or 4 times in the past few years. So to the best of your knowledge, and was it reasonable that you would have known? Again,
Right.
it's the taxpayer's responsibility to give you that information as well.
Yep.
You can consider it, and then you decide whether or not you're going to approach the select board with an E&O, or if you're going to wait until the following grand list year. Just because they bring it up doesn't mean that it must change. You have to consider all of those bits and pieces.
Yep.
And Christy, it looks like she attached that document link right in the chat as well.
And that was all the questions at the moment.
Okay. for reasons that I do not know, and I don't know that anyone really does, there is also a responsibility of the Board of Listers to notify your select board of changes for homestead declarations. So a property, when you launch it, was non-homestead because they had not filed their HS 122. And then at any point from there on throughout the year, they decided or remembered to file their homestead declaration. Those need to be sent to the select board on a list. I believe the NEMRIC program also has a report that you can print this from, so that you can provide that to your select board. But we've created a document here, which is a fillable PDF form for you to use if possible. And that will go to the back of your grand list as well. I think this is probably the piece that most people miss in town, but it is prescribed in statute. So again, we're giving you the tools to make sure that you're covering all of the things that you are supposed to do.
And the reason I like to think it's important, Deanna, is I think about that vault in the grand list, and I want that grand list in the vault, sorry. I always want that to reflect exactly what I have in my computer, right? And until December 31st for my build grand list. So if I made a change, even if it were a homestead, right? I want to update that one in the vault, and this is the way I can handle it in terms of homestead classification. So if you think of it like that, it kind of makes put your mind at ease. Oh, this is why I have to go through this, right? Because I always want what I'm processing in my grand list, even if it's after I've given that official copy to the clerk, I want it to match because the bills are going out reflecting what I'm doing. So I don't want something different to be in that recorded grand list than what I have in my computer.
I absolutely concur with that. I think the piece that's weird for me is noticing the select board because they don't have any jurisdiction over the education piece. But absolutely needing that information in the vault because that is your grand list information.
I have a couple of comments. The first one is an alternative owner goes to the Board of Abatement.
For the errors and omission process. So yes, we'll talk about abatement and how that's different from an appeal of value when we get to that point.
Yep. Okay, and the other one was we have to add late filers on a list for the select board, like an E&O.
So they must be noticed by statute, and that's why you'll see this caveat here in parentheses, select board and alderman approval not necessary. It is for informational purposes only, and you do not wait for them to review it to make any changes that are prescribed by those filings.
Correct.
And the lister that commented before about the late filers or a owner goes to abatement, it said if you don't take off the barn and they want a refund of taxes paid, then abatement is an option.
Abatement is an option. There are 7 reasons that are outlined in statute that someone can seek abatement, and a manifest error by the listers, meaning it's something they should have known about and did not correct or did not change, is a reason. So they certainly could go through that process, and we'll talk about board of abatement when we get there.
I think that's it.
Okay. All right, and then we are going to move on to the equalization study on page 24 of your document. Sorry, I'm flipping pages here. Christy, do you want to get us started on equalization study?
So the equalization study is a study that we at Property Valuation and Review do each year to see where your town is at relative to 100% for your assessment. To do that, we consider 3 years of sales, and we look at the sales price compared to your listed/assessed value to say, how is this town doing in terms of fair market value? How close are they, right? And then we also say, how well is this town doing in terms of equity? Are they treating taxpayers equitably? So this is our charge via statute. And the way that we do that is we allow you as a town to review your sales each year, 1 year worth of sales. each year and to say, give us feedback on those sales to say, these are good fair market sales because no other things influence the sale price. In other words, things like sale to a family member, financing, special financing, those kind of things, which we'll talk about. But we give you the opportunity through an exchange in VTPie to go through sales and give us information that you know about those sales.
Absolutely. Opportunity is a great word, but I like to put a lot of emphasis on this. It is statutorily required for you to do this review and to assist PVR with the study. The state does provide a per parcel fee of $1 per taxable parcel in your grand list to help supplement or cover the administrative costs for you to do this work. So it's not just $1 for each sale that transpires, it's $1 for each parcel. Okay. So equalization study explanation and the lister's role. So Christy talked about the purpose. Event or the end result of the equalization study is to find two pieces of information. We're looking for the CLA, the common level of assessment or appraisal, is common level of appraisal. And the purpose of that is because it directly ties in to your education tax liability. Because we are not reappraising every year, we need to adjust a tax rate to try and bring your your parcels up to 100% of fair market value for the liability piece, right? And then we also have a coefficient of dispersion, which I think we define here, but that's a lengthy one, that helps us determine the equity in your grand list. Are things selling for the same difference so that you have a low coefficient of dispersion, or is the difference really kind of spread out all over so that we're seeing that some people are not being treated equitably? Anything else here on the purpose, Christy?
I think you pretty much got it. The important part to understand about equalization is we're taking your grand list values and equalizing them or equating them mathematically to 100% for what the town will owe to calculate and help calculate what the town will owe to the education fund. So how much the town is liable for to fund their students. And we're equalizing that or making it equal to 100%. So if your common level is 80%, you're not going to be liable at the 80%. You're going to be liable at the 100% mathematically.
Absolutely. So Christy did mention the qualification of sales, and we're going to talk about all of the specific circumstance codes that you would consider when you're reviewing these sales to determine whether or not they are true, valid arm's length transactions. And then other sources of information. There are several sources of info that you might be able to use. It's really a really good idea to have at least a working relationship with your town clerk. As properties are getting ready to transact, they're going to see a lot of activity in their offices, whether that's title searchers or attorneys or property owners gathering their own documents, and people love to chat. So it is very likely that the town clerk has some great info that would help inform your decision. Having a relationship with real estate agents and brokers so that if you do have questions about a sale, that you're comfortable picking up that phone and reaching out to them. The buyers and sellers themselves will talk about a sales verification form. And the PTTR also has some really good information, though we know for those that have been here for a while that those are not always filled out accurately. Anything else there, Christy?
No, I don't think so.
All right. All right, so now let's talk about the reasons that you may consider removing a parcel or a sale from the equalization study. Items 1 through 7 are typically eliminated by PVR by virtue of what the attorney or preparer put on the PTTR itself. The biggest exception to this rule that primarily ski towns will see are timeshare properties. So those are properties that they're only transacting a period of time for maybe a condo or a house. Anything else about timeshares, Christy?
No, just to clarify, these are called special circumstance codes. So these are when you're qualifying or verifying sales. These are the codes you would use to eliminate a sale based on these reasons. So that's what these numbers are.
Right. And Christy and I actually gave a full morning class. I think it was 3 or 4 hours a few weeks ago on a more in-depth dive on these codes and the equalization study itself that is available on our website for viewing. All right, but we'll go through these as quickly as we can. So then one of the more common, particularly in small towns, I think, and as people start to shuffle property, maybe for estate planning or whatever that case might be, family sales. So those are going to be sales that are from parents to child, grandparents to grandchildren, niece to or uncle to niece. The PTTR is a good source of information for this, but remember that PTTR is basically a tax receipt, and there are very specific reasons that a property transaction might not be subject to the transfer tax at the time of sale. That does not extend to extended family members. So you very well could have PTTR show up in the study that are family sales, and that is why, because we need to be able to capture that relationship. Anything else there, Christy?
Nope.
Okay. 9, corporation and stockholder. So this does not mean that every time you see an LLC pop up on a sale that it is automatically invalid. What this is saying is that if John Smith owns John Smith LLC or Smith Construction LLC, he is putting that property into an LLC, or vice versa, maybe taking it out of that LLC. He is a stockholder in that business, and it would not be a valid sale. Anything else there, Christy?
Yeah, a lot of these aren't going to be clear cut. You're going to have to say, did this reason affect the sale price, right? So because somebody's fourth cousin doesn't necessarily mean it would be a not a fair market transaction. So all of these are kind of have the caveat of, did it affect the sale price of that property?
Very true.
I have a quick question.
Okay.
When a property sells, does the sale price become the new fair market value?
Not in the state of Vermont. There are some states that do it that way, though. So if you'll remember, I think it was back on day 1, the very last sentence in the statute that governs fair market value. It says sale price may be an indicator of fair market value, but it is not solely determinative.
Perfect,
And-
thanks.
If
And
the question is about if that would become your new assessment, the answer is no. Because you have to be equitable to all taxpayers. So you're going to keep them at whatever they were. The sale price alone is not going to change the assessment. I don't know if that's what they were getting at or not.
right. So along with those codes that we talked about, the category code, for example, not changing at the time of sale because it's the same property today that it was yesterday. And then we do have those codes that you can adjust based on the transaction and the new owner's information. It's very unlikely that the property value is going to change by virtue of transaction, unless it's going to be merged with another parcel or it's going to be subdivided off another parcel. But again, it's a piece of information. It's not the only thing you're going to consider when valuing a property.
Deanna?
Yeah.
I had a question on family members or a family sale. So
Okay.
a sale between family members that appears to be fair market value could be included. Example, do we use sales price to help determine validity and inclusion?
So I would say, I have seen hundreds, if not thousands of sales, over the years where a property to a family member will sell for exactly what your grand list has as a value or 0. Neither of those are likely indicating current fair market value unless you've just gone through a reappraisal, at least the one that's matching your grand list value. That is an indicator that they are just trying to move the property along. They didn't pay for an appraisal. There are probably some things about this transaction that might mean that the buyer and seller are not reasonably informed of what's happening. They're just trying to do it quickly. I don't know if you have anything else to add there, Christy?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Again,
I
it's
think
something
that
to
was it.
consider on whether or not to exclude it. If you are saying that father is selling this to their son, but you believe it's a true arm's length transaction, reasonable sale price, then in the comments section in VT Pie, tell us why you feel that way and let us consider it.
I would say in most cases, though, a family sale that you'll see is not going to be a valid sale.
Right.
I think the one that I was alluding to, I mentioned a fourth cousin.
Right.
You might put that you are a relative, right?
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that you gave them any consideration on the sale price because they're your fourth cousin and you don't really know them. So it's not always the same thing. A father to son, likely there was some sort of minimized sale price or some effect on the sale price.
Right. If you're a lister that it happens to be the town historian and you know everybody's genealogy, that doesn't necessarily mean that it impacted sale price. We've also seen plenty of sales, I think, between those on the call today, where the property sold for way more because they had a non-amicable family relationship. So
Yeah.
One last question. How does this work in study if the new purchaser has a year to wait and see if the owner comes back? I'm not quite clear on that.
so that sounds like it's a tax sale situation,
Mhm.
which we hadn't yet talked about, though I'd moved on to the next item already. So there is specific to tax sale. So the property taxes are delinquent. They've had due notices. The town delinquent tax collector decides to start tax sale proceedings. The preparation for that also includes notification to the taxpayer. And if it gets to the point of being auctioned off, so for liquidation or tax sale, there is a statutory process that the original taxpayer has 1 year to redeem the property. So to come back and pay what the final bid was at the time of the tax sale. And that's a whole other conversation that we're not going to get into today. But as far as the validity of the sale, that property sold under duress. So that would not be a valid sale. So I'm not sure if I hope that answers the question. But if you have a specific question about the delinquent tax process and tax sale, I'm happy to talk with you after class.
And that's it.
Okay. So for liquidation, foreclosure, tax sale, and I think in our other classes was probably 5 words or terms longer. Essentially what we're looking for here is, was there duress at the time of sale? Was there a reason that the property was selling or that they needed to offload the property? So, spouse passed away and the remaining spouse needed to move into an assisted living facility or could no longer afford the property. Those are reasons of liquidation or duress. Anything else here, Christy?
Nope.
Okay. Estate sales. This is one that is often miscoded in the validation or the sales study. Just because the property is in an estate or that the owner recently passed away does not automatically make it an invalid sale. Again, it's a piece of the information that you want to consider or would clue you in to look for more information. Ultimately, if the property was on the market and sold for a reasonable value without indications of duress, then it's going to be a valid sale. So please do not code things as a estate sale just because you know that the owner passed away. Christy? Anything here?
Nope.
Okay. Government sales, these are pretty straightforward. So this is going to be any sale that is to or from a government entity, which could be the state of Vermont, a municipality, a school district. Those are all considered to be government entities, or a county government, if that makes sense. Anything else there, Christy?
Nope.
All right. Charity, religious, benevolent. So this is another one where it depends. The fact
Mhm.
that it is to or from a religious or benevolent entity is a piece of the information. We need to, like the estate sales, we need to qualify that with other pieces of information to make our determination. I'll let you expound on that one, Christy.
Yeah, so the question again is, did it sell for less than what we're looking for, right? For fair market value, and was it affected by that entity? Okay. So was there, when we talk about benevolent, was there some sort of tax write-off involved? Did they give the property to the church or gift a portion of it to the church, that kind of thing?
Right. Unusual financing is a fun one for me, only because I have a very tax-oriented brain. So what we're looking for here is not they paid cash, right? Cash is not inherently unusual financing. What we're looking for here is whether or not the property had a mortgage, maybe with the seller of the property, maybe their owner financing, and what are the terms of that mortgage? Is there a balloon payment after 5 years? Balloon payments are going to be non valid sales. Was the interest rate reasonable? Was there a down payment of 20% or so that is typical in this market? Those are the things that we're going to look for. Those are not things that you are automatically going to know based on the PTTR or the deed. Another reason to make yourself very familiar with the land record books. Look at a few documents before and a few documents after each of those deeds and PTTRs. I would prefer that you're familiar with most of the land record books, but if you need to narrow down your search, that's what we're going to be looking for to see if there is in fact a mortgage that is held by the previous owner. At that point, you're going to reach out to the taxpayers or the buyer and seller themselves by letter, by phone, to the realtor, any way to get that information in order to quantify to us that it is in fact unusual financing. Anything there, Christy?
No, I think you got it.
It's my favorite one. I hope so. All right. Partial interest. So not to be confused with the code that we're going to talk about in a moment for a subdivision, where you're actually chopping off a piece of the property and giving or selling it. Partial interest is a property is co-owned by two owners or more, and one of those owners sells their interest to the other owner or another party. Okay, very, very important that you know the difference between those two things. Properties assessed in more than one town. Because you are not valuing the whole, say you have 50 acres in your town and the neighboring town has 10 acres, you're only capturing the value within your within your boundaries. So we cannot consider properties assessed in more than one town. You may run across a situation where they only sell the piece in your town, but it's likely that when you're valuing the property, you're also taking into consideration some economy of scale for the acres on the other side of the town line. So as a rule of thumb, we do not consider any of these so that we can be consistent across our grand lists and our study. Anything else there, Christy?
Nope. I think the only caveat would be we'd want to know what town it was in our, we asked you
Absolutely.
to list that.
Yep. So if you do have the opportunity or were in our class a few weeks ago, we did mention that we do need to know which town it is in. So yeah, use those notes. Excessive personal property is always an interesting one. Typically, we are only going to consider excessive personal property if we have two pieces of confirming information. So say you have a camp on a lake, which may be a house, depending on how you're using the property, but we've had that discussion, right? So one man's shack is another man's castle. And that house on the lake sold with a mechanical dock or a boat lift and a really, really nice motorboat. That boat and that dock may be valued at a substantial percentage of the overall property value. So we must take those things into consideration. You want to expound on that one, Christy?
Yeah, so they are supposed to declare any personal property on the PTTR. So unless we can really get some evidence as to what it is, we may not be able to either adjust the sale price or take the sale out. We really, really have to have good evidence for personal property.
Right. So for this one, if you really think that there was something that sold with the property that wasn't real estate, something that you've assessed in your grand list, it's really a really good idea to pick up the phone and call the realtor and find out. The reason that the personal property is often not separated out for from the sale price and the asking price on the MLS or that listing is because they are not able to get the same type of financing for the personal property as they are for the real estate. So if they roll that value into one and don't very purposely do not separate out that value, that's likely why. Okay. We don't like it, but that's the way that market or that enterprise works. It looks like we have some activity in chat, Teresa.
Yeah, I commented on one. Michelle was asking, would that be a divorce? And would there have to be, oh no, I can't see.
Oh, I think I see it. Divorce and a divorce decree in the clerk's office. So,
Right.
not all divorce decrees will, not all divorce decrees are going to end up recorded in your land records. You may have a divorce decree that acts as a deed as long as that decree defines the property very clearly for you, or it may come through as a warranty or a quitclaim deed giving up their portion of the property. So a couple of different ways that can happen.
And I also just added that using partial interest, I think that's what she was referring to. It could be someone adding a name to a title as opposed to a divorce and removing. It could be you'd use the 15 partial interest for if someone's name was added to the title as well.
Absolutely. Yep. The same is true in the reverse.
This question was about abutting, which I was trying to wait till you got to abutters, but I just will say it. What about a situation where a buyer says they paid well above market value for an abutting lot because they didn't want anyone to build? I've seen this. Valid sale?
We'll talk about that one in just a minute, and I think we'll answer that question pretty clearly.
And then this is for the excessive personal property. Condos often sold with furniture, the value of which is often fuzzy.
I'll let Christy take that one.
So if it's typical for a property to sell with some personal property, so an example, single family homes typically will sell with the refrigerator, stove, and possibly a dishwasher, right? Those aren't considered excessive. They're considered what the market presumes. In most condos, the market presumes that they are furnished. That's typically the way that they sell. So if it's typical for the market, then we're not going to worry about it because it's comparable to all the others. Condos get super fuzzy with that. We can't prove it one way or the other most of the time. So we typically will just ignore it and not assume that there's personal property. If they had really high-end antiques and they tell you that on both sides, the buyer and the seller, then that might be a different story.
Absolutely.
I think that was all that I had at the moment.
All right. We have 2 more codes before we get to abutters, but I promise we will get there. So subdivision, not to be confused with partial interest. This is where, again, we're taking a piece of the property, chopping it off and selling it to someone else. That may be an abutter, maybe an entirely new property owner in the area. Anything on subdivisions here, Christy?
I think what we're really looking to get is the span of the original parcel and the span of the new if you have it, because it makes it much easier for us to find and locate those things. Just the last 5 of the span would be great.
Other. Other is kind of a catch-all for all of the, if it does not fit in one of the other circumstance codes, but you truly feel and can prove that the property sale should not be a valid sale, then this is where you're going to put it. If you put anything as a 19 in your equalization study, you must include a description, preferably not a novel, but something that's very clear and concise, and attachments that support your argument. I don't know how far we want to go down the other rabbit hole here, but we did cover it very extensively again in that webinar that we provided a few weeks ago. Any other bits here, Christy?
I would just say the comment like sold to someone from New Jersey or whatever, something like that, or COVID sale doesn't fly. It needs to be really, truly was not market, right? All of those things that you talk about are part of real estate market. It needs to be something that is aside from that affected that sale.
Absolutely.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so now to the abutter sale. So we know that some abutter sales, somebody purchasing the property next door, might be fair market value, might be between a reasonably informed buyer and seller, but that is not typically the case. So in an effort to be equitable across all towns in the state of Vermont, even if you can make a good argument that it should be valid, we remove all sales to abutters from the equalization study period. I know that's a very short and not so sweet explanation. I hope that that answers the question, but we will never include an abutter sale in the equalization study if we are aware that they owned the property next door, regardless of what they bought it for. And then last but not least, we have large change post-assessment. Do you want to talk about this one, Christy?
So what we're looking for here is something that's different between your assessment and the sales price that you didn't basically have time to catch up on, right? So did they, we use the assessment at the time of sale. So let's say that they built a barn in August and sold it in September. And therefore, we would be using your April grand list figure, which was the prior figure, and you don't have a chance to catch up to grabbing that barn value until the following grand list. It wouldn't be apples to apples. In other words, the assessment we would be using didn't include that garage. So we would want to know about that. And we would want to confirm that, in fact, the next year, because we're also judging your listing practices, right? That the next year you picked up that barn on your new assessment.
All right. And then on page 26 of your document, you will see a sample sales verification letter that you could utilize, make it your own in your town. We've honed in these questions pretty well to be clear about what we're asking. Unfortunately, not very many people understand what the words concessions mean. So we do get some false positives there. But we do highly encourage you to send these out or consider sending these out for any sale that seems questionable close to the time of sale so that you have a better rate of response in getting that information back from the buyer and seller. And anything here, Christy?
Yeah, you can just make it part of your regular routine. Anything that appears to be possibly a good sale, but you're not sure. You could send out a sales verification form just to confirm the validity of that sale. And it's a good practice. You could include it with some information about your town for the buyers, contact numbers, where the rec center is, that kind of thing. You could also include a self-addressed stamped envelope so they feel somewhat more inclined or like they should return it.
Absolutely. I think we have some activity in chat.
Yeah, some questions. Number 20, it's a 21, large change. Can this include a new permit for change of use, commercial space, or any change of replacement value of physical construction?
I'm gonna put a big old depends on that one.
Yeah,
Because I don't know I don't know the extent of it, right? And whether or not or how it would affect fair market value. So I think all of these that would be like that, we'd have to look at it as an individual.
okay. So the one where you talked about adding the barn, Sharon is asking, so is that invalid?
Yes, in the example that I gave, yes. It would be a 21 code invalid because now if we're talking about a, 100 square foot barn, maybe not, because maybe it didn't make a big, huge difference in the sales price. But if we're talking about a 24 by 40 garage, then yeah, or barn, then certainly that would affect the sales price.
Yep. And the caveat there being, we will only consider a large change post-assessment if the value for that property actually changed to reflect that new barn or new garage in the subsequent year.
Right. If you didn't
Right.
address it the following year, then that's your listing practices, and we might just leave it in just because of that.
Major interior renovations typically do not require a building permit. The date when done likely not known to listers. If quality is clearly increased from prior assessment, keep sale in study.
So I think the thing that we need to remember here is prior assessment. The assessment date is April 1st of every single year. It is not if you did not set foot in that property for 10 years and you have no idea when that might have changed. This is another reason that we want to be in communication with the buyers and sellers to know when those things happened. Another incredible tool. I cannot overemphasize the valuableness of the MLS and public listings because they are going to boast about those things. And if they didn't exist at the time of sale but happened after, you can start to get a feel for whether or not to consider that information. The key here again, did the value change on the next grand list? Some of these things aren't found until the time of reappraisal. It is important, particularly if you don't have zoning or don't have interior zoning, to develop an inspection methodology that works for you and is reasonable. So that driving around town a couple of times a year, noticing whether or not they have roll-off dumpsters because they're gutting their kitchen or their bathroom, something that you can fall back on and say, hey, I may have not caught, the one up on the class 4 road because they didn't do that renovation at during the time that we were doing our drive around, but we caught what we could. There's no exact science. You need to develop a process that is reasonable, that's consistent, and that works for you. I don't know if you want to add to that, Christy.
No, I think you got it.
Okay.
I mean, only thing that I would add is that you can't really cherry pick if you got to be equitable across the board. So if you're looking at everyone, then you're keeping it equitable, but you can't just kind of go out and pick certain properties you do that to.
Oh, absolutely. We're not going to only focus on the properties that sold in that instance.
Right.
That's not exactly sales chasing, but it does mean that you're honing in on a particular area, or a particular portion of your properties. We need to develop a system that's fair and equitable, and that we're doing that drive around or some type of data collection, or consideration at least once a year. I will say that there was a few weeks ago on the Comp 60 listserv some great resources about town letters that some towns send out every year, asking the property owners to, maybe be forthcoming and tell you what might have changed with their property. You can imagine that you might get some false negatives there as well, but it's part of that attempt in that process that those towns have set up for themselves.
I have a couple of comments. A return postage paid envelope increases the number of verification forms completed and returned. And often discover interior renos from photos online, Zillow, Realtors.com.
Absolutely.
And I think that is it.
Yeah, and I'm sure that seemed like a whirlwind of information. Again, we have an entire class dedicated to this process. If you were not available or able to join us when we did that a few weeks ago, I highly encourage you to go to our website, search webinars, and put that in your queue to brush up on before you start your sales study. Okay. We are running a little bit behind, which is another reason that I'm kind of rushing here. So let's talk about real quick the CLA and the COD on the next slide or two, and then we'll do a quick break so we don't cut too far into Terry's time.
Sounds good.
Okay. So common level of appraisal, I'm going to read this right from your documentation on page 27. The CLA is the measure of how close a town or city's local assessments are to fair market value. Vermont municipalities will no longer be required to reappraise when the CLA falls below 85, but the CLA directly affects the education tax rate and use value calculations. PVR CLA combines 3 years of sales ratios, as well as a utility and current use adjustment. Any sales ratio without these parameters is a level of assessment. Anything on that one, Christy?
Nope, not right now.
Okay. And the coefficient of dispersion, again, the other results of the equalization study, is a measurement of uniformity and equity of assessed values and can be a measure of the quality of the assessment process. A COD of above 20 will trigger a reappraisal order. That's another reason that you want to focus in on that number as well. And again, on page 27, we have a snip from an Excel spreadsheet that Christy, I believe Christy generated, or at least uses to help you be able to estimate your level of assessment, not your CLA, but your local level of assessment and the COD. So the results of that equalization study should not be a surprise. She also gives you the Excel formulas in order to program this. Definitely
so
not
important.
new lister material, but
Right. So just important takeaways. Common level is what we do, which is the 3-year study. Okay. It's called a common level because we add in a utility adjustment and a current use adjustment. So it's called common level of appraisal. It is used to equalize your grand list to 100%. That's the important part of why we do it. And that is our statutory charge. The coefficient of dispersion is measuring the equity or the fairness within those ratios. So are some folks way above 100% and some folks way under 100%? Okay, it's measuring how fair you're being from one to another. And the reason for the COD or coefficient of dispersion is because if you go above 20, then you are going to be required to reappraise. So that's the purpose of that measure. And just kind of the takeaway there, and you can set this up in Excel and do year by year, 6 months of sales. You can do different neighborhoods. It just allows you to see what level you're at for different portions of your market. Or you can go ahead and put 3 years worth of sales in and kind of mimic ours so you come pretty close to where we're going to come out.
all right.
Deanna?
Yeah,
I just had one quick question on COD. Should I ask now?
absolutely.
It says, so the COD only looks at valuations across sales types as opposed to within. That seems insane.
Christy, are you there to comment on that?
Yeah, sorry, I was and my mute was on. There's an overall COD, which is what we certified, which was what we certify, which goes across all, but there's also a COD for each category, assuming that we have enough properties within that category to be statistically confident in those numbers. And you can also always run a COD for any sub portion thereof that you think is appropriate. It's
Right.
actually, and the COD that we use is actually international standards, so it's IAAO recommendations for what we use, and 20 is actually pretty high, so it's a high standard to get to.
Thank you. That's all.
So we are going to, because we do have a special guest with us today, we have Lisa Pincus from Taxpayer Services, who is all of the DA's go-to for homestead declaration questions, or issues when we see a homestead come through that might be questionable. So we want to take full advantage of her time here with us today. So we will go through the homestead declaration process, the lister certificate of value, as well. And then we will cover mapping and the remainder of the document at some point tomorrow while we do the demos and information from VCGI and Pat from Catalyst. All right. So hopping into calculating and assigning homestead and house site values. And I will say that I recognize this seems a little out of order, but it is because that the Lister calendar operates from April through March. So many of you are into the homestead declaration reviewing process now. So I just want to make it very clear that we understand that, but you'll see at the top of your page of 28 that it does say we're back in the month of February. Do you want me to go ahead and read the definitions for homestead and house site, Christy?
I think so. I think that's going to be our easiest way for some folks that might be new.
Okay, so as we've mentioned before, it is the responsibility of the listers to establish these subsets of your value. So it's a portion of the overall listed value, and we're going to assign bits and pieces to homestead and house site. So the definition of the homestead is the principal dwelling owned and occupied by a Vermont resident individual as the individual's domicile. A homestead includes the entire parcel of land surrounding the dwelling, determined without regard to any road, river, or stream that intersects the land. A homestead does not include buildings or an improvement detached from the home and used for business purposes, and does not include that portion of a principal dwelling used for business purposes if the portion used for business purpose includes more than 25% of the floor space of the building. The value of outbuildings and other improvements not used for business purposes are included in the value of homestead. For an example, swimming pools, tennis courts, and landscaping. And you can find this information in Title 32, VSA 54017, and Regulation 1.54017 available on our website. So, keynotes here. You might know that someone is operating an office out of their home until it equals 26%, you are not going to have that reported to you via homestead declaration. So that is, as a new lister, that's usually the first piece that we start to get caught up on. Anything else here, Christy?
Yeah, and the importance for the homestead, why we do it, is for the rate that's applied, the education rate that's applied. That's what that homestead value is used for. So if a person declares a homestead, whatever you put in the homestead value will be charged the homestead education tax rate. That's the whole that value is what will be charged the homestead rate.
Absolutely. It does not change the value of the property one bit. The homestead declaration itself is just a portion of that value. And that's the piece that if they file a homestead declaration, that they will receive that homestead rate on. Now, for the house site, the definition of a house site is the portion of a homestead that includes the principal dwelling and as much of the land surrounding the dwelling as is reasonably necessary for use of the dwelling as a home, but in no event more than 2 acres per dwelling unit. In the case of multiple dwelling units, no more than 2 acres per dwelling unit up to a maximum of 10 acres per parcel. The house site value is not used in the tax classification system. It is solely used in the state's income sensitivity program. The house site means the 2 acres of land surrounding a dwelling for more than one dwelling may share that same house site, provided the dwellings are contained within a 2-site acre area. Christy?
Yep, so the house site is a portion of the homestead that is used by that property owner, right, up to 2 acres, and it is the purpose of it is for the income sensitivity or income payment that they might get towards their taxes. So the tax department compares what they paid in taxes compared to their income, and they may get a portion of it back to net off of their total tax bill. State payment, it's called. So that's the purpose of the house site value.
So I think if you look at the bottom of page 28, before we move on to what it includes, it does say in italicized writing, simply speaking, a house site means the dwelling situated within the state of Vermont, owned by the claimant, and as much of the land surrounding it, up to 2 acres, as the dwelling in the home, or for use of the dwelling as the home. Not included would be any area of the property that the owner would receive money for business use, again, over that 25% for in the house, and then any outbuilding that is used for business purpose would be excluded from the homestead and the house site.
And any rental.
And any rental, even if it's just 1%.
Mhm.
So Christy,
And
what do we,
for me, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what do we include in the homestead and house site value?
So, which one are we talking about first?
So,
Included. Oh, this is included in both. So the water, sewer, and septic, so your site improvements, landscaping, pools, tennis courts, attached and detached garages, and all sheds that are not used for commercial purposes. Okay, so if you have a shed or barn that's used for commercial purposes, then it would not be included in either the homestead or house site.
and was there something else that you wanted to add there? Or that's where we were getting?
I wanted to say, and I think it's probably part of this, for me, the big delineation too is house site can only ever have one dwelling. Okay. Homestead could potentially have more than one dwelling if they were all used for homestead purposes.
Absolutely.
I have a
So,
couple of questions. Do you want me to hold them or?
Let's hold for a minute just till we get through these definitions.
Okay,
right. So when Christy says that a house site can only have one dwelling, that means that for the purpose of the tax credit that they may have for consideration at the time of filing their income taxes, and I think Lisa might talk about this in a moment. If there is an apartment over a garage, whether that's attached or detached, that is a separate dwelling and likely should not be included in the house site. If it's in a detached garage, it definitely should not be included. So we want to make sure that we have those conversations. If you are unfamiliar with how to apply the homestead and the house site in those, well, I guess we're seeing them more frequently now, but in those more nuanced discussions. Okay. Anything else there, Christy, before we go to questions?
Nope.
Okay. Let's take the question and then we'll hop over to Lisa,
okay.
since it looks like she has something to say.
So why do we get business/rental uses under 25%? If we get a 10%, does that mean they actually filed 35%? If we get a 50%, does that mean 100%? I get quite a few under 25%.
They're likely rental if they're under 25%, or there's possibly an error.
But you
Right.
don't add to the 25.
No, you do not.
No.
More than one dwelling may share the same house site, provided the dwelling are contained within a 2-acre area. You mean as long as they are owned by different tax filers?
Yes, the multiple house site thing is typically for farm corporations, as I understand it. You could have multiple house sites on a property if it was owned by a farm corp.
Okay.
Any others? Yeah.
Go ahead,
Deanna,
sorry.
can you think of other situations there? And maybe Lisa can.
Yep, there are some situations where you have two co-owners of a property, each owning their own dwelling. So both of those properties would be on their own on the homestead because they both individually own or collectively own both of those houses, and they can have the homestead declaration filed for each of those. I think that's a nuance that we should probably have Lisa talk about since we have her here.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree with that. I try to look at those situations where there's separate dwellings, say 10 acres of land and two structures, two owners, each owner lives in their own structure. I try to look at it as though it were a duplex or a triplex.
Mhm.
So even though they're not connected, that's how I look at it. All the same owners, all living there, but living in their own piece of the property. So in those cases, that's when the department would want for a Lister certificate of house site value to give the value of each structure, because each of those individuals are allowed to file a declaration to get the property credit.
Right. All right. Do we have more questions?
Yeah, Lisa did make a comment that when the department asks for a Lister certificate of a house site value, please provide form HS 315 or HS 316. The Lister card is not useful to the department to determine the house site value. Next question is, so Lisa, if four owners on deed, parents and child, they can both get a house site value and both parties need an HS 315 because tax bill is not applicable?
Only if there are multiple structures. If there's only one structure, then there's only one application for homestead, and all owners' incomes have to be included in the household income. So I think that's what you're asking. So if it's parent and child, they would each be able to file if there were multiple structures that they were each occupying, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Right.
And
So
go ahead.
I just wanted to add, in the instance that there are four owners on a property, but the homestead declaration comes through in just one person's name, then we would expect that for the state payment calculation that we don't see in the Lister and assessor's office, but that what Lisa sees is that they are only claiming 25% ownership because they would be one of four owners. So something to be aware of, but not something that we manage in our offices.
Okay. Does the rental status of the apartment over a garage matter for house site? Some folks just use it for family visits or not at all.
It would, it
Go
only
ahead.
matters if they're not using it for their own personal use. If the family, comes to visit, or sometimes they go up there and hang out up there, then it's their own personal use. It's not rental. If they have a family member that lives there exclusively, say a mother-in-law, and the owner is not occupying that residence, that should still be coded as rental use, even though they're not collecting monies, because it's a separate unit and it's not for their own personal use to calculate their house site.
Okay. Linda Sharon, I think you might need to elaborate. She just said, this is where I think another house site value for combined acreage. I'm not quite sure what she means there, so maybe she needs to elaborate. What about a detached accessory that is not rented? Say an in-law or relative lives in it, but both owned by the same owner. I think that's similar to what you just said.
Right. Now, I mean, if both the parents and the in-laws all own the property and they live in their own section of the house, then that's going to also look as though it can be considered a duplex. So if they all are owners and they all live there and they all live in their own section or their own unit, then they can each apply for a property credit. And we would then want to have a Lister's certificate of value for the accessory apartment and for the main home, so we know how to calculate the credits.
Right. And again, it's important to remember that you must be an owner of a property in order to file a
Mhm.
homestead declaration. So if that accessory dwelling over the garage or attached to the house is rented out, whether or not it's to a family owner or a family member or not, or it's only rented for, a part of the year, maybe on April 1st, it happens to be vacant, that's going to be business or rental use, right?
Mhm.
So we're going to remove that value from the homestead and the house site value.
Okay. If a homeowner's tax preparer filed the business use percentage for the previous tax year and now wants to file an amended return with the correct percentage, can the listers change their records due to this change?
No, the grand list closes on December 31st of every year. Um, there may be some application to the abatement process if there was an error in that maybe so I guess it wouldn't really apply here, but if the original homestead declaration came in with no business use and the town or the listers forgot to remove the business use from a prior year, that would be an abatement issue. But the amending tax returns is more for the income side of the house. I don't know if Lisa, you want to expound on that at all?
What was that? Oh, yeah, the only thing that they can amend past the October 15th date is house site, taxes, ownership, and income. Anything that's in section A of the HS 122, that can't be corrected after the grand list closes.
Okay. Let's see, if a garage apartment is listed on Airbnb, do we assume rental and business use?
That should have rental or business use, yes, because they're not using it for their personal use. There are calculations on how they can calculate based on number of days actually rented and so forth, but they should have business or rental use. Rental use is 1% or more. Business use is the above 25%.
Mhm.
So in that case, it sounds to me like they should send a lister response.
Correct. If they know that the individuals are advertising for Airbnb and they know that they have actually rented through Airbnb or any other avenue, then and they get the homestead declaration comes through with zero business or zero rental, they could send a lister's response. Now, if they consider it business use and it's less than 25%, then it wouldn't show up if they only rented it for, say, 2 or 3 weeks. But it would be valid to send a lister response so we could reach out and maybe do some research and see if maybe they just forgot.
Right. I see Christie's unmuted, but we might be going to say the same thing.
Go ahead.
Okay. So again, we want to be able to very clearly, if I could speak clearly, differentiate between business and rental use. Business use is only applicable to the homestead and house site allocations if it is greater than 25% of the dwelling or even 1% of an outbuilding. Okay, so the only time you would be applying a percentage of business use would be to the dwelling structure itself. As soon as that homestead declaration comes through with a box that's checked, outbuildings for business use, that entire structure, again, you may have more than one structure, so you need to identify which one is business use. That entire structure becomes non-homestead and non-house site. As far as rental, that is 1% of the outbuilding makes the entire structure non-residential. Same with business use. Okay. But you will see homestead declarations downloaded to you that have 1, 2, 5, 10% rental use. In those instances, anything as small as 1% rental must be reduced or removed from the homestead and house site value.
Okay.
Okay.
Linda, kind of expounded on what she was saying. With a combined parcel, don't you add a house site land value on the vacant parcel, or am I in another section?
So we're on to property valuation discussion, so we probably don't want to go there today.
Okay. In the instance of a divorce where the ex-spouse is still on the deed, but does not live there, does the house site need to reflect a 50% ownership, or can the remaining spouse claim the entire credit?
So we do not consider the ownership as far as valuation and allocation. What we would expect to see in that instance is if the ex or the spouse that is still living in the property files their homestead declaration, that on Lisa's end of things, that it would show that there is a 50% ownership. We're not going to see that on the lister side of things. It would not hurt to send a lister response to alert Lisa in the event that they filed their homestead declaration incorrectly. Would you agree with that, Lisa?
Yes, and basically just to answer that question, no, that the one that is still in the house, even though it's multiple owners, they will file on the full value, the full house site value and taxes on that house site value. What adjusts their credit is the ownership, and they can only claim 50% if only one of the owners lives in the house.
Okay, and the last one, it says unlanded mobile home with a different owner.
So unlanded,
As in the
oh, go ahead.
land itself is owned by someone else? Is that
I'm not sure. I think Sharon, you're gonna have to elaborate a little because it says unlanded mobile home with a different owner.
So let me go ahead and take a whack at it, and see if this answers Sharon's question. So you may have unlanded mobile homes in your grand list, whether it's because they are on a property that, you know, they were allowed to place the mobile home there, or whether it's in a mobile home park. If you are familiar with the homestead declaration form or want to go take a look, you will see that there is also consideration for lot rent, that may be claimed. So they're not going to receive any value for the land per se in their valuation and on their homestead and house site. It would just be the value of that mobile home, but they might have consideration on that state payment by another avenue. Being that
correct?
lot rent.
And each of these individuals that are owners of the mobile homes that are unlanded should be getting a landlord certificate from the landowner so that they will have the correct information to file their homestead.
And that is all I see for questions at the moment.
Okay. All right, so we've already kind of covered this. So what not to include in the homestead and house site? So again, we're talking about detached buildings that are business or commercial. In the principal dwelling, we're talking about amounts that are greater than 25% business use and any percentage of rental use. And in the, let's see, it says land greater than 2 acres, second dwelling and site map. Christy? Or site improvements, sorry.
Again, sorry, talking with my, so those are items that could be in the homestead, but not in the house site, right? Because house site is only up to 2 acres, and there wouldn't be a second dwelling in the house site, but there could be in the homestead if they were both used for homestead purposes, as well as the site improvements for that second dwelling. So only ever one house in house site, only ever up to 2 acres for house site.
The dangers of reading from the PowerPoint and not the course document. Thank you. All right. We do have HS22 download instructions on our website. That document is GB 1071. So this is how to download the homestead declarations, I believe, into your NEMRIC billing or grand list program to eventually get your bills. We also have the homestead declaration process in the VT Pi program, which we will have Pat demo for you tomorrow on how to review those with all the fun reports that we've created for you, as well as how to create a list of response to Lisa and her staff to review any questions or concerns that you have. Anything here, Christy?
Nope.
All right. We have that HSD 315 and 316, as Lisa mentioned before. You may have a taxpayer bring one of these into your office. So they would apply for those kind of corner cases where there are more than one dwelling and more than one owner on a property. They may also be requested if the property was not a homestead in the prior year. So for new construction or a subdivision. Anything else here to mention on these, Lisa or Christy?
We might also request that if there's in excess of 10 acres and the person that purchased the property purchased it from somebody that has never filed a homestead and the grand list does not assign a house site value for a dwelling, one dwelling and less than 2 acres, the house site is normally the real property. So we can usually take a guess, but when it's more than 2 acres, we need to get the house site value from the town.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that is the end of our homestead declaration process or content for this course. Again, this is another area that we couldn't possibly cover it all in this training. So there was, I believe now it's 5 or 6 weeks ago, a homestead declaration training specific to all of these things and so much more that is available on our website that was taught by our Jen Myers and Teresa Giles. Anything else here, Christy or Lisa, before we move on, or any other
Just
tidbits?
if you can you go back one slide just real quick? One more, sorry. Yeah, right there. Oh, no, you had it. Sorry. Go forward. Right there. This document, I will put it in the chat also, but it's also super easy and a good way to just follow directions and go through the process of downloading homesteads and what you need to do for each and every single scenario. So I think it's a good reference and you should use that.
All right. My parting words for homestead declarations is not unlike every other thing that we see in our offices, particularly PTTRs. The preparer or the taxpayer may file incorrectly. Like they may give you some information that just doesn't jive with what you know about the property. At the end of the day, if you know that the filing is incorrect, say they filed and said they have business use of an outbuilding, but they have no outbuildings on their property. You know that that is incorrect. You're not going to create an outbuilding to assign a non-homestead value to it. You're just not going to do that. So it's really important to take in the information that's received, see if it's different from a prior year, and then have that internal discussion about whether or not it makes sense before you change any percentages. All right. Anything else, Lisa, before we move on away from your topic?
Just if anybody has a question, just you can always email me if it's about the homesteads rather than doing just lister responses because there are so few characters that are available there. Also, I kind of have a direct line now.
Ooh.
Don't get this out to taxpayers, please, 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 please. But for any town officers or any of the DAs, it's coming through Teams. It's awesome if you ever want one. It's really cool. And it's 802-828-7651. I can put that in the chat too.
All right. So if you have the document in front of you and want to flip to page 44, we have some helpful contact information. Lisa's email address is already there. So if you wanted to write in that phone number right next to that, that'll be a great resource for you back in your office. All right, so we're going to switch gears now, and we are going to let the fabulous Miss Terry Gildersleeve take over and give you some quick little demo points in the last 28 minutes of class.
Everybody has the Grand List program or the NIMRIC Grand List program, and there's different pieces in it that you would do. There's transfers, there's parcel maintenance, and this is where you normally update everything. It's all switching to your CAMA program now. The important things are your live updates. You'll see mine is in green, which means I need to update. I just wanted to keep it in green to show you. The reports, I think the reports are important. This is where you're going to go a lot of times, is you're going to go to your 411, and this is the summary of everything in your town, and it gives you some error messages that you want to look at and you want to correct. Some will let you go and some will keep you from filing. So you want to read these and correct them so that you can go on to the next. This right here is, did you check this stuff? And if you click on accept, if you did, then I'm not sure if it's going, these two are not going to. And then next time you run it, those should not come up until you do an update. I will do a transfer really quickly for you so you get an idea. You go to, and it's all written out pretty clearly in your documentation to help you do this after we're gone. Trying to get to it now. As you know, Parcel Start at Parcel Maintenance has all the different fields that you need to run a grand list. You want to be consistent, what's really important. If you have, this is a great way to get yourself so that you're looking for errors and you can fix them, because your information in here is only as good as the report writing that you want. So if you click in each of these fields and you click on find, if there's anything that's out of line or not categorized correctly, say there's a space in front of it or your wording is not correct. And a perfect example would be some might have RD, some might have road. You want to be consistent and all say RD and all say ST instead of street, things like that. This is a good way to find it, because then you can pick your fields and view them to find what you need. If you're using oh, I have a baby grand list. That's right. Okay. So if you use every field, you want to look at the description even and make sure that the descriptions are all consistent throughout your town. I often say to get a book and put in that book your how-tos, how to enter things into your grand list. So here's my book. And we can send it to you. It's okay. Once it opens, there we go. So this is how do you in your town do your parcel IDs? How do they do the tax map? What information do you put there? How do you list your owners? How do you list different things? 911 addresses. How do you use common names? I went to the website for the post office, and this is the recommended initials that they prefer to use for each one of these. So I cut and pasted in my book. For property description, I put, what is it going to say? If it's a mobile home, I'm going to put MH in there. If it's land only, I'm just going to put land. If it's a dwelling, I'm going to put dwelling, and I'm always going to put this before this. And that way, when I'm running reports, I'll be able to pull whatever I need. These are the category codes. I put this in my book so I knew what to look for. And then, of course, there's extra pages. I wanted to show you that really quickly. So now let's go into transfers. So with a parcel transfer, you get a PTTR in your office. You're going to go in, and there's right here it says choose add or edit. Add means you're transferring a parcel from one person to the next, or subdivision, or whatever you need to do. You're transferring the property to somebody else. When it says edit, it means, oh, I made a mistake on a PTTR that I did, and now I want to fix it. And I'll show you that also. Transferring, you're going to hit transfer if it's a regular transfer from me to Christy. If it's a split, because then I decided to sell a piece to Michael, and I sold a piece to Michelle, and I sold a piece to Janice, then I can do it under a split. Transfer ID, that is a town specific one. Your town clerk probably puts like the year and the number of the transfer that it is for the whole year, and that's your town specific. Your book and page would go there, your sale, your closing date, and your recording date. This is important because the equalization study uses closing date, and the town may or may not use recording date, and we would need that. Sale price is just that, sale price. Validity is always checked as if it's valid. So if it's not valid, you want to make sure you uncheck that, and you put the reason for you to look at later. So when we're looking at it, you can go, oh yeah, okay, I get it. And then we find the parcel. This is the parcel that I'm going to transfer from me to my daughter, or my whatever, I'm going to call her Junior. And I'm going to transfer the whole thing. And then I just go save. This is the main part. This is what I'm changing. The PTTRs in front of me. I'm going to change all the information here. My daughter's moving in. I'm moving out. She's getting the parcel. Well, this happens to be miscellaneous land, but she's going to build a house. And I'm going to hit save. If I need to change anything else, or I forgot to enter anything else, I just click on modify, and it brings it back up. And you modify whatever you need to, and then save it. And then save it here. Do you want to record another transfer? I'm going to say no. So now if I go there, you'll see that if I hit my F4 key on the top, it'll populate whatever this is right here. F4 key recalls this parcel. And you'll see that the update is here. To do it, excuse me, to do a split or a subdivision, you would click here and go split. You would pick up, open the, oops, you would, I'm going to go here. You would open the parcel, and you would need to know before you even did this, oops, you need to know what parcel is available to be able to create. So if I did this and I'm saying, okay, so there's a 1.1 and a 1. Okay, I know which one I want to do. I want to do this one. And I don't have a 1.2. Oops, and I want to split it. So I'm going to create the new parcel underneath. If I can click on it. I think because I messed with it. Hold on. So parcel transfer. Look for a parcel. Open a parcel. Oh, I did it again. I'll try it one more time. Parcel transfer. I'm going to split it. Book 1, page 1, 2025, 200th. Sale price was 20,000. It's not valid because I sold it to my son. I'm going to find the parcel. I'm going to go, okay, good. This is the one. Double click on it. Now I can enter it here. Oop, go back there. 0000001. Two. And I'm going to modify it. So there's a little arrow right here. If I'm going to modify this one first, then I would click to that modify, or if I'm going to modify it here. So click on modify. It's going to open it up. You're going to go XXX, Lister, Junior, Junior. Oh, the second, the third, the second. Okay. And you fill in the address. And all that good stuff. I can skip it right now, but you would fill that all in, and you see where its span is blank. It is going to create the span for you. This is going to be a miscellaneous land only parcel. Owner is going to be, owner lives in the town. Acreage is going to be 5 acres now. And I'm going to save. I need to modify this one. The only thing that's changing on this one is the acreage. And I'm going to change it. So with the acreage, you want to keep in mind, if you are in your grand list, you see how that I'm entering it on the front screen. There's 2 ways to do it. One is on the miscellaneous acres page over here. You could put in 5 here. And then what it does is it blocks you from doing it on the front page. Or you put it here and then it doesn't block you. Just a little helpful hint. I usually just use the front page and it works well. And then I save it. And then you save this and you're good. That's a pretty brief way to do that. And then what I want to do is I want to index my records and it kind of puts them all back in order when you do a few transfers, and it never hurts to do it twice. So let's see. Parcel transfers we got, and it kind of spells it out for you, how to look it up and what to do. Get through that. So now let's do some reports. Your reports is your non-taxables, your state, your Form 411. I don't think mine is going to show. It might. If I close, see how those other ones that I checked off are no longer here because I already looked at them. I dealt with it and yay. And then we go, okay. And we preview. So here's your 411. You can print it, you can view, make sure all your exemptions haven't expired. These are ready to, so I want to make sure they were on the ballot because it's expiring 4/1 or 3/31 is when it should have. And you review all this and you go, yay, it's done. There's more to it, but we get in, this is kind of a show you what it looks like. Okay.
Hey, Terry,
Yeah.
there was just a quick question on the transfer tab. Do we put a reason for valid sale?
You could, if you don't think you could remember, if you like. It's your notes so that when you're sitting there doing our sales validation in VTPie, you could have this and you could say, okay, I did that. Here's my notes. I'm good. So there's a transfer report that you can use, and it'll give you your notes on here also. So if you wrote that it was invalid and you wrote a reason, then it'll show up on here, and that'll help you later. I happen to be playing and didn't put reasons. See here? These are the ones I just did, where it says son. I know you can't read it because it's small. Invalid family daughter, that's what I wrote. This one is son. So you can use this report, and you can specify between the ranges, and then you can use that to go through all your returns. So I think what I'll do is I'll go through your percent complete in Microsoft and help you there. So first thing you want to make sure you do, and I can't say it enough, is do your NIMRIC backup. It takes a second, doesn't take long at all. Do your NIMRIC backup, save it to wherever you want, not a problem. I'm going to go into Microsoft. I already opened it. So I have done this more than once where I'm staring at the screen saying, okay, you can open now. I don't know how many others have done that. Where you would go data and display. And then you would look up the parcel. This is the parcel I want. And then you could do whatever work you need to do at this point and fill it out from your data collection class, from your data collection sheets. So what I want to do is what you want to make sure you do is you want to make sure that you have a mechanism to do backups in Microsoft. So you would go to, at the top, to back up your Microsoft, you would go to tools, and then down here it says NIMRIC backup. You would do the backup that way. And then your live updates I spoke about. When you do your live updates, I'm going to go back to NIMRIC real quick. It's going to show where you're at. See, my CAMA is up to speed, but my grand list is not. So I would check that, and then I would do the update. I'm not going to do it right now because we don't want it to do that yet. So now I want to do, that's review for consistency. At the last couple pages in your handout, I have instructions on how to do percent complete and how to do reinspect. So where you find them, I'll go into the parcel first, is on your parcel tab, you have right here, reinspect. So if you want to create a reinspection report, you would make sure you coded, yes, I need to go back. They're not done. So it'll print, and then save it. The little green button here. So once all that is done, then you would go, when you get out of Canva, always remember when you get out of the screen to click on the door. And then you're going to go to Data, Browse this time. Instead of Display and Input, you'll go to Browse and you'll go Display, Print, and Reset. Here, you would click on Field Selected and you would go down and it kind of gives you an of what it is on the side. The first is the program code, and then it says CAMA land, CAMA dwelling. What we would find, we would look for the parcel ID. And it's going to be in the main parcel section. I went too far, I think. Span. We could go with span. And then reinspect is what we need. So it's main RE. Here it is right here. See it? And if I double clicked it, I moved it over. So now in this side, I can put it in any order I want by clicking and dragging. I want that reinspect number to be there first. So then I can click on the filter. See, there's a little filter right here, right beside the printer. Right now, it's just gray and looks like a little graph, half of a graph. If I click on it, once I add a filter, you'll see that it will turn red. So now I want to add a filter. What do I want to pull? I want to pull reinspect. So I would go down to reinspect, here it is. And this is equals or does not equal or anything like that. Okay, so we're going to say equals the yes. Remember that yes in the program, all yeses are equal to number 2 and all no's are equal to number 1. So I'm going to put a number 2 there and I'm going to save it. So first thing you want to do is you want to see here it says count. You want to count them because you don't want to print a report or get a report that has all of the parcels. You want to make sure that you've got it coded correctly, and this will help you to do that. So then you just click count, and it's telling me that there's 135 records with that. And it's like, okay, I like that. I'll say okay. So now, once I did that, I can save my profile and name it. And once I hit browse, these are all my records, the 135 records that I need to go reinspect. And then I just click on report. So you could have names and you could put the addresses, you could do a lot. You can add more to the report. And then this is your report. So that's how you do the reinspect. And you see up here where the filter is now red, you want to remember to always clear your filter. You don't want to go and look at your parcels and it's only showing the ones that are needs reinspection. So the next one you would do is you would clear. And then once it's okay, it's back to being normal. And then you can do another one. So the next one you would do would be, say we're going to add for percent complete. So we go first we have to set the fields. So we want to find our fields. We'll use these. Let's add name. No, let's not. we'll just add this. And we're gonna set it to parcel ID. We're gonna change to P, I think it's percent. Oh, I bet it's on the top.
Harry, Chris Mealy had a couple of comments. Do you want me to give those to you?
Sure.
Two things. Add category level shows the drop-down labels. And history tab has a more robust area for tracking inspections, adding comments, and multiple inspections, etc.
Thank you. Oh, it's in the section part.
And then just one other one. Can we get this report in Excel?
And Chris, you could answer that one.
Do we need to unmute Chris?
Oh yeah, you have to make them
Oh, he
this
commented.
feature is for reports only. So that would be no.
Okay.
So section, here we go. I'm in the section, there's a percent complete equals or does not equal. Does not equal 0 or 100. Does not equal 0. Oh. Well, there. Okay, I'm going to count them. It's saying I have 561, which means somebody probably didn't take the other ones off, or it's coming out with it with zeros. So I may want to add another one. Where it might be section complete equal, no, does not. Sorry about that. Does not equal 0. Okay. And then let's see, where did my filter go? I want to count it. Now it's saying I have 17 records. So that's why you want to count it, is to make sure you're not getting more than you need. And then if we look over here, it's going to give us all the records and we can go to the report. And as I said, you can add more fields to it so that you can see how many you need to actually do, or where they are, or what name they are, whichever one you're comfortable with. And you can save and label it. A new profile name, we'll call it percent complete, and you're good. And you save it. Oops, I already did. And now it'll always be there when you come to go do it again. You just double click on this and it's all set to go. There you go. And then remember, clear your filter. Okay. And then that is now cleared. And you now have everyone. I think I wanted to make sure that you got those couple of things. The training document that you received has many more different things and kind of spells out exactly what you need to do or how you want to do it. And we can take some questions if there's any. And we will send out that little book for you. Any questions, Teresa?
I'm not seeing any yet.
Okay, so there's some mapping information in there that we're gonna cover tomorrow. And there's other resources in the other document even. And I think that might be it. I think I covered enough pretty quickly, sorry, but. Christy? Deanna, anything else? About what's
I
happening
have a
tomorrow?
question.
Okay,
Is there a course survey that needs to be completed today?
nope, tomorrow.
No, yep, you'll see it tomorrow.
I do see some comments from Chris about in the chat. He did mention a couple of nuances there into how to get that information out into Excel if you do want to export it. And Chris, is it fair to say that you have instructions on how to do this specific to your Nemrick products on your website? Correct. Okay. And for those who use the Microsolve CAMA program, and we know that everybody at this point is using the Nemrick Grand List program, there is a plethora of webinars and documents out there. And he said he is also happy to take calls to assist folks as well. Just again, this was a very cursory overview of what listers need to know, at least to be conscious of as you're working through your process. There is no way that we would be able to go into a super in-depth on every process here to, first of all, we don't want to overwhelm you. So that's why we do chop out those little individual pieces like the homestead declaration process, the current use piece, the sales validation is our own training, so we can really delve in and do those things.
So, Deanna, what I'd like to explain really quickly
Yeah.
again with the, because there was a couple of questions about getting it in Excel. Right here is the export data. You can click on that and pick your fields and you can find percent complete, like clear all, and then pick whatever fields you like. And then you can export it to Excel. That's really quickly. And I'm sure he has, oops, I'm going to break it. And you pick which kind of format you'd like. So yeah,
Okay.
go ahead. Sorry. I
No,
just wanted to
that's
share
okay.
that real quick.
I have one
I know.
quick question.
Okay.
If we filled out the form too early from the last class, will we need to fill it out again? Or will we get credit for it even though we filled it out too early?
We didn't send the form out last class. I mean, for this lister training, we have not sent it out yet.
Right. So for the
Training
current
before.
the current use training, which was a 2-day training, if you filled it out on day 1, I'm sure you recognize that there were some questions in that survey that you were asking yourself, how could you review or answer the questions because the class wasn't over? So essentially that form is to prove to us that you attended the class, you're looking for a certificate, and to comment about the class. You know, what did we do well? What could we improve upon? And I know that there are some other questions in there that Jen has provided to you.
And we
So-
do have a time when you checked in and when you checked out. And if that doesn't add up to a certain amount, then you wouldn't qualify for it anyway. But we have your attendance and it does it all for us.
That's
And
correct.
thank you for being available, Lisa. That was very helpful.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you for having me.